Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for coming, especially in the rain. I think we all thought that the rain was going to stay south, but unfortunately, it's pouring. But it means a lot to us Gold Star families that everyone's here paying tribute to these men and women. So we're going to begin our ceremony today with, I'm Kendra Lynn. My brother, Staff Sergeant Stephen Tudor, was killed in Iraq in 2007. We're going to begin with an invocation and a prayer from Deacon Schooner, and then followed by the national anthem by Alicia Lynn.
Let us pray. Lord, in the midst of our grief and the memory of our loss, we gather in your presence and remember. God, so much violence, so much pain, so much heartache. May our memories of this day remind us of the horrors of war as we grieve with those who still mourn and share memory with those who cannot forget. May we be stirred by your love and compassion for all as we remember those who bravely responded and gave their lives to save others. May we draw strength from their selfless sacrifice. As we remember those who became neighbors at 9/11, sharing and caring for people they did not know, we give thanks for their generosity and hospitality. May it remind us of the call to be good Samaritans, reaching out across race and culture to other victims of violence. So many in our world have lost loved ones to terrorism and war. May their plight fill us with a longing for peace. Let us seek for understanding and reconciling and not turn from your ways. Above all, God, may we remember your faithfulness and learn to trust in your unfailing love. Amen.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's lamps gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight, oh, the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Thank you, Alicia. That was beautiful. So like I said, my name is Kendra Lynn. My brother was killed in Iraq in 2007. About a year ago, I received an email from Patriotic Productions about an opening ceremony taking place in Washington, D.C. It was the opening ceremony for this Remembering Our Fallen National Monument. Its first stop ever was at the National Mall. I wanted so bad to be there, but had prior engagements for a wedding in Colorado that same week, so I missed out on the opening. I really didn't read a lot about it at that point because we were traveling. I was having a teenage daughter that was just starting school. So In October, about a month later, I received another email with the subject line, "Host the National Monument." I read some more about it, and I thought to myself, this is something I want to bring to our area. So I sent an email, asked if my dates were available, and they replied yes. So I said, okay, I want the weekend of 9/11. I then went to the 9/11 committee that I serve on in Lackawanna County, and I asked them if they were willing to help me. I was going to make them do it anyhow. But they of course were on board to help me. So I told them, this is what we need to do, this is how much we need, and let's do this. And they've been by my side this whole time. So for the last 6 months, we all worked hard with lots of help from so many people, and here we are in the rain and all. So I am so thankful. So now to tell you my story. I'm a middle child of 7 kids, 3 boys and 4 girls. We were quite poor growing up. We moved a lot, 36 times to be exact, before I was in the 9th grade. But Northeast Pennsylvania was always our home. Growing up, all we had was each other because we moved so much. It was hard to make friends, so our siblings were our best friends. I tell you this because when you do not have a lot of direction growing up, you tend to want more for yourself. Stephen, being the oldest of the boys, wanted a purpose in life. He wanted more than what we were offered as children. So we were living in Dunmore at the time. He was about 2 months from graduating, class of 1989, and decided to enlist in the United States Army. If you remember, that was the beginning of our conflicts with Iraq, the first time. So a year after he enlisted, he was sent over to Kuwait to serve in Operation Desert Storm. My other 2 brothers, Juan and Mario, were lost without him. It was always the 3 boys. Girls were never allowed. Stephen served a year overseas in Operation Desert Storm, came home on leaves to visit wherever we were living at that point. Juan and Mario looked up to him and saw that the military was giving Stephen a purpose, a career, and a hopeful future. So upon their graduation days, both enlisted in the United States Marines, each serving 8 years. My brother Mario met his wife as she was in the Navy at the time. Stephen also met his wife Wanda. She was also in the Army. My sister Kalani also married a Marine, Corey, and he just retired after 20 years of service. So military life was all around me, and life was good. So we fast forward to September 11, 2001. Stephen was home on leave from Germany. He was staying at my house with me in Tunkhannock. My daughter Taylor was just a couple weeks old, and I had to run out, so I had asked him to watch her while she slept. I'd only be gone for a half hour. He was scared to death, leaving him with the newborn baby. We had plans that day to go visit friends in Scranton. I turned on the radio just as the second plane hit. I immediately called Stephen and told him I didn't think we were going anywhere. He had no idea, so I had him turn on the television. It got really quiet on the other end. He knew what was happening. The next couple days were really tough. I had to get him back to the airport with all the craziness that was happening. Picking him up from the airport was so different than dropping him off. We all know how scary the days, weeks, and months were after September 11th. Stephen remained in Germany for a year and then went back to Fort Drum with his wife and 2 kids. On April 8th, 2003, I received a phone call that my oldest sister had overdosed. Stephen was the closest sibling to me, being only 3 hours away at that point because my brothers and sisters and parents were all scattered across the United States because of the military. So my brother came right down and stayed with me for 8 days until my sister Luana took her last breath on April 16th, 2003. I wish I knew that was going to be one of the last times I saw Stephen. A year later, Stephen got his orders to be deployed to Iraq. He was told he'd only be there for a year, but we all know how that goes. In my mind, statistically, I was thinking he would totally be fine because my sister just died. There's no way God would take both of them. So I really did not worry so much. My sister dying was the most awful thing that I had to go through to that point. No way could I go through this again. Stephen served his year. He came back to Fort Drum for about a year and a half and then told he was going to go back over. So close to retirement, he had already served 18 years, so he just had to get through this last deployment. He wanted to come home and be with his wife and kids and travel. April 21st, 2007, the day that changed my life. My phone rings at about 6 a.m. in the morning. Looking at caller ID, I saw it was my brother's house phone calling me. I knew it wasn't Stephen because he was in Iraq. I knew that my sister-in-law wouldn't be calling at that time unless something happened. I remembered picking up the phone, not saying anything, and just crying, saying, "Please tell me he's okay. Just tell me he's okay." For the next couple weeks, months, and years, we're such a blur, just trying to go through this process. So when I started finally coming back from that faraway place, and trust me, it was far, so far that my brothers were seriously thinking about committing me somewhere. I wanted people, everyday people, to recognize what our military men and women sacrifice every day for our freedom. Not just the families that are directly faced with the war. Most people don't even know what a Gold Star family is. And honestly, I did not either until Stephen died. I have learned so much since that dark time in my life. We are not alone in mere personal grief or our desire to honor the fallen. We acknowledge the sacrifice and the bravery of these men and women because we are all in awe of their great sacrifice, courage, and devotion to duty and each other. These men and women, our men and women, are fallen on the field of battle. Forevermore, that is their legacy. Their names are now enshrined on the scroll of America's hallowed dead, and where they died and where they shed their blood is sacred ground to us. As we look at the monument, we see over 5,200 behind us, faces of the fallen. We see their personal life. They had kids, parents, families, just like us. They went out on Friday nights. They went to the movies. It's not about politics or color of skin or what God you believe in. We are all in this together. We must do our part to honor the fallen and support our current military. My heart hurts for every single family that has gone through this journey. I look back at what I have learned. Never judge someone on how they grieve. We all do it differently. I speak Stephen's name as much as I can. I feel closer to him. This monument makes me feel closer to him. My Gold Star families make me feel closer to him. And everyone being here helps me feel closer to him. It's our job and our duty to honor the way they lived. They're not here, but we are. While my brothers can't even hear his name because it hurts them so much, birthdays and anniversaries, the only communication to each other is a simple text that reads, "I love you." It is not something you get over, it's just a new normal. It's always there, and it'll be with us till we die. My brother's son, Harry, he turned to drugs to deal with his grief. and he died 4 years after my brother. So my sister-in-law Wanda buried her husband, and 4 years later buried their son. It was living the nightmare all over again. Same funeral home, same cemetery. His plot is right next to Stephen's. I often wonder how one family could have so much tragedy in their life. But honestly, it has made me who I am today. Stephen may not be here, but I carry him with me every day. And I will speak his name and honor him until the day I die. On a side note, he would absolutely hate this. He would hate this. He was just so quiet, and he just hated attention. I'm sure he's up there saying, "Damn, Kendra, do you really have to do this?" He was very low-key, very shy, but a heart of gold with a laugh and smile that would really melt your heart. Saying farewell is never easy, but honoring their name and contribution to the legacy of defending freedom will forever live on. Thank you.
Oh, no.
Are you sure?
Yeah. A little rain's not going to dampen our spirit. Thank you, Kendra, Gold Star family members, distinguished guests, veterans, friends. Thank you all for being here today. On behalf of Major General Anthony Corelli, the 53rd Adjutant General of Pennsylvania, who could not be here this afternoon, I would like to extend greetings to all of you. My name is Colonel Edwards S. Little, Jr. I am the commander of the 55th Maneuver Enhancement Brigade, Pennsylvania Army National Guard, which is headquartered here in Scranton. It's my pleasure to be here. I'm deeply honored to stand with you in the presence of this magnificent memorial that commemorates the sacrifices of those men and women who have laid down their lives in service to this nation since 9/11. I'd like to take a moment and acknowledge any who have personally lost a loved one in the line of duty to this country, in particular our Gold Star families. It doesn't matter how much time has passed. No words of condolence from me or anybody can begin to adequately console a survivor's grief. And while our grief from loss may change throughout the years, it never leaves us. God bless each of you and every one of you who grieve for your loved one. I'd like to take a minute to thank all those who arranged for the Remembering Our Fallen National Monument to come here to McDade Park. In particular, I'd like to thank Kendra, who I only just recently met, but I feel as if I have known her for some time. Your brother and I had a lot in common. I also deployed in Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and I just feel like you're a sister of mine. You are the proud sister of Staff Sergeant Stephen Tudor, who was killed on 4/21/7 in Baghdad. He is forever in your heart. He will be forever in our heart. Kendra was instrumental in getting this monument here to Scranton. Thanks, Kendra. Your brother's spirit is with us today, and he is proud of you and all that you have done to remember his service and the service of his brothers and sisters. Believe it or not, it's been 17 years this week since the 9/11 attacks. For me, it seems like just yesterday, and probably the same for a number of you. In many ways, America's sense of unity and patriotism strengthened considerably immediately after the terrorist attacks. If you're old enough to remember, you can probably recall how we all came together as neighbors and citizens to answer the call, any call, for help. And service came in many forms, from checking on the elderly, to donating food to the needy, to prayer, to simply being kind to one another. Do you remember? In many ways, it brought out the best in all of us. Many Americans, to include those being celebrated today on this monument, chose to respond to the 9/11 terrorist attacks by either joining the military or extending through reenlistment their military service to pursue the evil that attacked our nation. These men and women volunteered knowing full well that their military service would require deployments overseas in harm's way. Each knew the potential risk to their own lives. Each knew the sacrifice that would be required of them and their families. And yet, they decided to serve their fellow Americans anyway. We can look to Scripture to put this in perspective. John 15, verse 13 says, quote, "Greater love has no one than this, that he lay down his life for his friends," unquote. Today we honor and celebrate these American warriors who have shouldered this burden of responsibility and made the ultimate sacrifice. Most of these honored men and women were normal citizens who answered the call from their everyday communities to defend all that we hold dear. All faced extreme, difficult circumstances far from their homes and families. None had time to think about the politics of why they were in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. All suffered hardships that were indescribable. None particularly wanted to die for us, but I firmly believe that they preferred to face evil head on rather than have our nation's children face it again later. While the global war on terror initiated after 9/11 has officially been over since 2014, the all-volunteer force of today, currently fighting in Operation Inherent Resolve, continues this tradition of service. We take very seriously Article 1 of the Code of Conduct, which states, quote, "I am an American fighting in the forces which guard my country and our way of life. I am prepared to give my life in their defense," close quote. The sacrifices that our service members and their families continue to make are indescribable, and they are incredible. As the brigade commander, tomorrow I'll be sending off one of my units to the Middle East for a year's worth of service. Please keep the 28th Military Police Company and their families in your thoughts and prayers as they prepare for their mission overseas. All of us who wear the uniform and have worn the uniform to our nation do not take our duty lightly, and we promise to never forget our brothers and sisters who never returned. And that's why we're here. Never leaving a fallen comrade is a big part of what we believe. And even though our comrades are not physically here anymore, we stand with them in spirit, promising to always remember, always. For many of us alive today who deployed with the men and women on this monument, carrying on with our own lives after returning from war can be difficult. Some are overburdened with the memories of friends lost and cannot live a normal life. For some, it is too much. And as Kendra said, each deals with it in his or her own way. Many of us who have returned from war sometimes struggle with associated guilt and regret. We ask ourselves the hard questions: why was I able to return to live my life? Why wasn't my life taken instead of my comrades? But as much as these thoughts can sadden us, for me it helps us to look at the sacrifice of these men and women in a different light. Perhaps we can celebrate the lives they lived and the ideals they upheld in living their lives rather than be stricken by the grief of their death. Yes, celebration of their lives, not defeated by their death. Perhaps we should strive not to be saddened by their death, but rather to be inspired by the way they chose to live. And how did these men and women choose to live? They truly were extraordinary. The values they upheld and personally demonstrated make this country very different from any other in the world. Values like loyalty, duty, respect, self-service, honor, integrity, personal courage, every one of them had those traits. Focusing on this, who they were, rather than the evil that ended their lives, is the way I choose to remember, and hopefully you do too. This monument, this collage of pictures of individuals as we remember them, full of life, full of living memories, full of smiles, full of love, is how we might think to remember them and how I would recommend to remember them. It is how they would want you to remember them. It makes our connection to them and the sacrifice they made so much more personal and uplifting. Their sacrifices deserve more. It is more than just a name on a piece of granite. It is more than a sad reflection of how their lives ended. It is a living symbol of how they chose to live. So as you circulate around the monument, take in their lives. Celebrate who they were. Absorb their energy. And most importantly, as Kendra said, we need to remember. Remember. And when you leave here today, be sure to pass on what you learned here. Be a part of the educational process needed to ensure that our country never forgets the accomplishments of these great Americans. We all have a role to play in ensuring that the rest of our countrymen, those not here today, know and understand the sacrifices made. We owe it to these selfless heroes to ensure that our citizens, especially our children, understand the cost in blood that is required to defend our freedom. Thanks so much for letting me be here, a part of this memorable event. May God bless each and every one of you. May God bless the families of every one of these Americans on this monument. Never forget.
Oh, beautiful for heroes proved in liberating strife, who more than self their country loved, and mercy more than life. America, may God thy gold refine, till all success be nobleness, and every gain divine. Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountain majesties above the fruit and plains. America, God shed his grace on me, and crown thy good with brotherhood, from sea to shining sea.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, everyone.
First, a poem. What is this label, this gold star pin, that fills my day with what might have been? Until it's gone, I won't be me. I do not want it. It hurts to see. Each day begins, my heart gets tight. The tears flow free beyond the night. Missing you controls all thoughts. Distractions try, but never reach my heart. I often wonder if the pain will stop. Day in, day out. Day in, day out. I know that others share this thought, the emptiness that this pin has brought. We will carry on any way we can. Each of us treasures where you stand. We hold these memories deep in our heart, reliving each other's moment of the day we part. My hope is one, to meet again, and only then will my hurt end. For then the time will come at last to rid myself of this pen and the past. I would like to thank Yvonne and Bill Williams, who put this monument together initially. Neola Fritz and her fiance, who is here today. Patriotic Productions, Kendra, Talia, and Charlie Spaniel, who kept me informed because I live out of town. My name is Tom Dolphin. I'm the proud father of Staff Sergeant Patrick Dolphin, who died on July 31st, 2011. I'm originally from Dunmore, moved to Richmond, Virginia, where Patrick was born, moved back to Dixon City, moved up to Elmhurst. My youngest son, Tom, just got out of the Navy after serving with the submarine service. I work at Dover Air Force Base with the families of the fallen. We assist families who come in to meet their loved one after they died overseas. I work with the USO and TAPS, Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors in Washington, D.C. Families who come to Dover for a dignified transfer are in crisis when they come there. There's a 48-hour turnaround for the Gold Star families. Some elect to come, some do not elect to come. But we do have services on base now, along with the Fisher House, that provide crisis care, counseling, and get them through the dignified transfer. People ask me how I deal with grief. Stories that keep them alive in our hearts, allow them to live forever. Stories about their heroism, their help that their partners need while fighting in combat situations. But of all the stories over 6 years that I have in my heart, there's one that stands out. After Patrick's funeral, a boy approached Patrick's mother and asked if she was Patrick's mom. After confirming that she was, he said, "Patrick was always my hero." This boy was handicapped up in North Pocono, and everybody picked on him. And this boy said that Patrick was the only one that stood up for him. A British satirical graffiti artist, whatever that is, once said that it appears when one dies, they die twice. Once when they breathe their last breath, and another when someone in the future speaks their name for the last time. We don't want that to happen. We that know our loved ones on these walls will always speak their name, will tell their stories. Our heroes love what they did. They loved who they did it with, and they especially loved who they did it for. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming here on this perfectly miserable day, but we're here for a perfectly wonderful reason. First of all, just show of hands, how many people have served? That's always the way. When I tried to put together what I was going to say today, my wonderful wife, sitting under that umbrella with a purple coat, said, "Look at this on Facebook." There was a posting by a young guy named Preston Bulliard. Preston Bulliard was the son of Command Sergeant Major Tim Bulliard that died last weekend. 9 deployments, 7 Bronze Stars, and Marianne was in contact with Celeste Sapala, who was the mother of Sergeant Sherwood Baker, who was the first person from this area to be killed in action. And Celeste emailed back to her, and so the journey begins. And unfortunately, there are too many of us here that have stepped onto that journey. But I will say, before I talk about Mike, last week in a TV interview, Mary Ann said, it didn't get in the TV part, but it said, the only way you can deal is to find your passion and go volunteer and help others that are involved with that. Because by helping others and being involved with others, Kendra is probably a perfect example of that. That's the only way that you can feel better. Okay, quickly our story. Mike was our 5th child. He was born in spring of 1981, just like the George Strait song. And he was the son that everybody would ever want to have. You know, he was a great student, captain of a couple teams in high school, student government, went to college, president of his fraternity, varsity sports, graduated with honors. But he came home Thanksgiving after 9/11, and he brought us the papers that he'd already qualified for the X course to qualify for the Q course for Special Forces. And that was a very difficult time for us, because, again, my wife of over 50 years now, we got married before I deployed. I had left college in my junior year. And she was home alone having our first child, Aaron, while I was near a hellhole called Swanluck. Somehow we dissuaded Mike, but he said he was going to go after he graduated. And he went to the Marine Corps, qualified for flight training, graduated in 2003, which was the invasion time. The Marine Corps canceled. They usually have 2 OCS programs in June, one for Mud Marines and one for aviators. They canceled the program for the aviators. So they delayed it till January. Mike said, I'm not going to wait. He enlisted, went to Fort Jackson, got basic training, qualified for officer candidate school, airborne, sapper, British SAS, was assigned to the 3rd Infantry Division, and he was the platoon leader of the EOD, the demolitions disposal, explosives demolitions disposal, and 17 days before he was to come home, he had already signed over his platoon, but he received actionable intelligence about a bomb factory, and he didn't want the new guy to go. And he went and accomplished. And on December 20th of 2005, our journey began. I'm just reminded of, not to make this an English class, but Shakespeare in Richard III's quintessential NCO, Jack Falstaff, makes a toast before going into battle, and he says, "We few, we precious few, we band of brothers." Many of us watched on HBO the production Band of Brothers about an airborne company that landed in Normandy, then went to Bastogne through the Hurton Forest, and wound up at Birch's Garden. That unit was commanded by a man named Dick Winters. And Stephen Ambrose, the historian that wrote the book, asked him at the end of the book, he says, "How does it feel to be a hero?" And he was a captain, but then Colonel Winters said, with a disbelief in his face, he said, "I'm no hero, but I've had the privilege to be in the company of heroes." And all of us here today are privileged in the same way. I would like all of those who raised their hands, if you could, stand, please. And I'll preface this by saying there are a couple of, I have friends that are here now that were NCOs, and I've taken ribbing from them for many years about being an officer. But I want to remind them I had 3 stripes on my arm before I had bars on my shoulders. And I think I still have a command voice. So if you would, attention! To the Regiment of the Fallen, present arms. Order, arms. Thank you. I just want to say, and I have to get my glasses to read this, and I'm done after this, and we're all wet, but and I'm probably all wet before that. I think we've all heard Lincoln's famous quote from Gettysburg about the last full measure. But I'd like to read you what Ronald Reagan said on November 11th, Veterans Day of 1985, if you'll indulge me. It is, in a way, an odd thing to honor those who died in the defense of our country in wars far away. The imagination plays a trick. We see these soldiers in our mind as old and wise. We see them as something like the founding fathers, grave and gray-haired. But most of them were boys. When they died, they gave up 2 lives. The one they were living and the one they would have lived. When they died, they gave up their chance to be husbands and fathers and grandfathers. They gave up their chance to be revered old men. They gave up everything for their country, for us. All we can do is remember. Thank you.
I guess I'm the sissy of the bunch because I have a poncho on. My name is Bill Evans. I lost my son September 19th, 2005. Even as many years have passed, coming up on 13 this month, it's still, the pain is always there. But events like this, and memorials like this, and people like this are what makes it livable and doable. My son was a photographer, and he approached me when the recruiter approached him, and he said, "Dad, what should I do?" He said, "I can serve my country, I can keep my job, and I can go to college, all in the same place." He loved working with special needs people. It was a passion of his. And he also wanted to be a photographer for National Geographic someday. And that never happened. But there's more than just his life and these pictures of these life. If you take a moment and think of the families, the friends, the uncles, the aunts, the brothers, sisters, there's millions of people involved in this journey of grief. We always have to respect, we always have to honor, and we always have to remember. And by saying their names as much as we can and telling their stories, sometimes when people don't even want to hear it, we do. Ask people. If you see somebody with a gold pin on, ask them about their loved one. Most people will tell you their story. Some people don't. Some people can't talk about it. The families that are here today and the families around the world that have lost a loved one, stay connected as a Gold Star family, which is not an open membership that anybody wants to be in, but it's also one of the best that there is. And there's many organizations, many people here, many friendships have been made right here that are unmatched by any. The two gentlemen that spoke before me, we've met before, and it's always a pleasure to see them and to see so many people out here. And it's an honor to me to be able to even speak here, to see this memorial, and a special thanks to Kendra for getting this memorial here. I've known her for a couple of years, but not real good, but I'm just proud to even be part of this. Thank you.
God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her with the light from above, from the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans, white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a honor and privilege to be here with all of you today. I'm very sorry to all of you with the broken hearts that all of you have. I'm very, very sorry. I've lost siblings, but it wasn't during the war, and I'm very, very sorry. And I know there's that hole that's there is something that's it's immeasurable to try to fill. But I know that it would have been better for it to be a nice day, but I truly believe that the heavens are crying, and for these great men and women that lost their lives behind us. I'd like to just thank all of you for being here, because the best thing to do is to keep their name alive, who they were, and what they were to all of you, because it really matters. I mean, these are your children, your nephews, your nieces, your cousins, friends, just such a big part of your life. But I want to get back to Kendra. We have this organization called the 9/11 Memorial Committee. Charlie Spano right here is the chairman. And we do numerous events to remember our fallen, our veterans, Flag Day, a little bit of everything. And we were dedicating the names of some of our servicemen on the back of the 9/11 Memorial, because we had lots of space, and it was the right thing to do. And we just couldn't find the family members that went with Staff Sergeant Stephen Tudor. Couldn't find them. Looking, we just couldn't figure it out. So one of my friends was watching Newswatch 16, and she saw this young girl named Kendra up in Tunkhannock have this huge balloon release in the name of her brother, Stephen. And was like, wow, there she is. So we got the connections together, and we brought her in, and we talked to her, and we acknowledged Stephen the following year at our 9/11 memorial service. And you ever just meet someone and it's just a special fire, there's something just in them, there's a glow, there's something special about them? Well, that's what she had. But what she also had was she had a broken heart, and she still has a broken heart. And the love of her being his sister is a love that's immeasurable. And you heard the words that she said about how they moved around and how her siblings became her best friends. She was never going to ever let her brother's name ever be forgotten. So she was involved with our organization for a little while, and then this past November, she comes to us and she says, there is a beautiful memorial that's traveling around the country that acknowledges everyone that has died since 9/11. And we were like, really? And she said, yeah, and there's thousands and thousands in the name of all these servicemen and servicewomen. And it was going to happen no matter what. But she said, she goes, can we bring it, do it the same time that we're doing the 9/11 memorial leading into it? And that was last November. And there was a large price tag with this. And Kendra went out and single-handedly got all the donations for this to be here today, to honor all of your relatives, all your loved ones, and everyone that matters. And I was looking at this coin that she gave me yesterday, actually, of Staff Sergeant Stephen Tudor. You know, she, this is who she thinks about every day. I mean, she goes on with her life just like everyone else here who has a broken heart. But she keeps him in her memories, thoughts in her memories. So I just wanted to tell everyone here I'm very sorry for the loss. And I'd like to thank everyone that's here that are veterans and all of our first responders for what you do every day. And thank you for your service. Thank you so much. But I could not stand up here and speak without giving something to Kendra, because Kendra is a very special person, and she brings a great spark to our 9/11 committee, and she really pushes us forward. So at this time, Kendra, would you please come forward? Everyone travel safely home. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for everyone that came out, battled the rains. Thank you to my 9/11 committee, Charlie Spano. He's been great when he gets my text 2 days later. Blue Star Mothers, Lord Bishop, you guys all are amazing. You guys have been there from the beginning. You supporting our Gold Star families. May your stars forever remain blue. Eagle Cleaners, Kathy and Buddy Croft, they have been amazing. I think Buddy shares this monument every single day, maybe 3 or 4 times a day, trying to get people reading, and they have been wonderful. They sponsored this, and I'm so thankful for them. The Sergeant Jan Garnish ride, Talia, thank you so much. She stepped right up at our first meeting and said, what do you need? Special thanks to Dave Evans. He literally took the whole week from Thursday till next Tuesday off of work to be here to help the Gold Star families find their loved ones or anybody that's here. So thanks, Dave. I don't know where you are, but thank you. The Lieutenant Michael Cleary Fund, thanks to Jack and Marianne. I really wish I got to meet Michael. I've read all about him, and you are so lucky. The proudness you must feel. Scranton Unico. My people in charge of the motorcycle escort, Paul Shizzle, Marshall Lenz, and Dwayne McDavitt. Y'all are rock stars. You guys kicked butt on Thursday. Thank you so much. My family, my friends, my husband Shane and daughter Taylor, my boss Michael Bailey, who literally had to hear me talk about this for the last year every day. He's a rock star too. Thank you to the Gold Star families. Thanks for sharing your son or daughter with us and their story behind us. Stephen's not here, but I accept it, and him dying for our country is one less other family having to go through this pain. As we come to the closing of our ceremony today, we do have a final ceremony on Tuesday at 8 a.m. That'll be the closing of the wall. It'll be the annual 9/11. So y'all are all welcome back if you would like to come. We're going to end now with the singing of Amazing Grace sung by Talia Walsh, then the benediction, and then the playing of taps. Once the playing of taps finishes, we'll have a moment of silence for about a minute or two, and then about 5 minutes after that, we're going to start reading 6,958 names that were all killed since 9/11. But feel free to get up at that point and walk around. You could hear the names as you're walking through and look at these pictures and remember that they were just like us. They had lives, they had kids. And that's it. Thank you, everyone.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious in that grace appeared the hour I first believed. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see.
As we bring this service to a close, let us pray. For care and healing for all, especially those affected by the attacks on September 11, 2001, and for all victims of violence and terrorism around the world, that they may find comfort and peace. Let us pray for the safety of our servicemen and women abroad, for civil servants who protect us and keep us secure. May they always be kept safe. Let us pray for our leaders and for the leaders of all nations, that they may work together to address the problems that provide fertile grounds for the growth of terrorism so that there will be peace. And for ourselves, let us pray that we find the ability to forgive and for an end to all hatred, beginning in our own hearts. We bring all these prayers to you, our Lord and God, forever and ever. Amen.
Master Sergeant Evander E. Andrews. Specialist John Joseph Edmonds. Private First Class Christopher T. Stonesifer. Machinist Mate Fireman Apprentice Bryant L. Davis. Engine Man First Class Vincent Parker. Electronics Technician Third Class Benjamin Johnson. CIA Johnny Michael Span. Private Giovanni Maria. Electrician's Mate Fireman Apprentice Michael J. Jakes Jr. Staff Sergeant Brian C. Prosser. Master Sergeant Jefferson D. Davis. Sergeant First Class Daniel H. Pettori III. Sergeant First Class Nathan R. Chapman. Sergeant Nathan P. Hayes. Sergeant Jeanette Lee Winters. Staff Sergeant Scott N. Jermosin. Captain Daniel G. McCollum. Gunnery Sergeant Stephen L. Bryson. Lance Corporal Brian P. Bertrand. Captain Matthew W. Bancroft. Staff Sergeant Dwight J. Morgan. Staff Sergeant Walter F. Cohey III. Specialist Jason A. Disney. Master Sergeant William L. McDaniel II. Specialist Thomas F. Allison. Staff Sergeant Carrie W. Frith. Staff Sergeant James P. Doherty. Chief Warrant Officer Jody L. Egner. Captain Bart D. Owens. Major Curtis D. Feisner. Staff Sergeant Bruce A. Rushforth, Jr. Staff Sergeant Juan M. Rideau. Sergeant Jeremy D. Fasci. Specialist Curtis A. Carter. Chief Warrant Officer 2, Stanley L. Harriman. Specialist Mark A. Anderson. Sergeant Peter P. Kraus. Technical Sergeant John A. Chapman. Senior Airman Jason D. Cunningham. Sergeant Philip J. Spitak. Aviation Boatswain's Manhandling First Class Neil C. Roberts. Private First Class Matthew A. Commons. Chief Petty Officer Matthew J. Borgias. Staff Sergeant Justin J. Galiski. Sergeant Jamie O. Moggins. Sergeant First Class Daniel A. Romero. Staff Sergeant Brian T. Craig. SEME Katrina Renee Grady. Sergeant Gene A. Vance Jr. Sergeant First Class Peter P. Tix II. Tech Sergeant Sean M. Corlew. Staff Sergeant Anissa Ann Sharrow. Sergeant First Class Christopher J. Spear. Sergeant Ryan D. Foraker. Sergeant First Class Mark Wayne Jackson. Lance Corporal Antonio J. Sled. Private James H. Evers. Ensign Jerry O. Pope II. Lieutenant Commander Thomas L. Robinson. Specialist Pedro Pena. Sergeant Stephen Checo. Chief Warrant Officer 3, Mark Osteen. Sergeant Gregory Michael Frampton. Staff Sergeant Daniel Leon Kissling, Jr. Chief Warrant Officer 2, Thomas J. Gibbons. Sergeant Michael C. Berry. CIA Operations Officer Helge Bose. Specialist Brian Michael Clemens. Chief Warrant Officer John D. Smith. Chief Warrant Officer Timothy Wayne Moling. Sergeant William John Tracy, Jr. Specialist Rodrigo Gonzalez Garza. Petty Officer Second Class Daryl Jones. Private First Class Spence A. McNeil. Private First Class James R. Dillon, Jr. Navy Petty Officer Third Class Jason Prophet. Lance Corporal Jose Antonio Gutierrez. Staff Sergeant Kendall Damon Waters Bay. Corporal Brian Matthew Kennedy. Captain Ryan Anthony Bepure. Major J. Thomas Aubin. Second Lieutenant Thurell Shane Childers. Lieutenant Thomas Mullen Adams. Specialist Brandon Scott Tobler. Lance Corporal Eric James Orlowski. Corporal Kemapum Ahan Chanawangsi. Private Jonathan Lee Gifford. Private Nolan Ryan Hutchings. Lance Corporal Donald John Klein Jr. Private First Class Tamario Demetrius Burkett. Sergeant Brandon Curtis Rice. Lance Corporal Patrick Ray Nixon. Lance Corporal Michael Jason Williams. Corporal Randall Kent Rosicker. Lance Corporal Brian Rory Busing. Lance Corporal Thomas Jonathan Slocum. Staff Sergeant Philip Andrew Jordan. Corporal Jorge Alonso Gonzalez. Corporal Jose Angel Garibay. Lance Corporal David Keith Cribley. Sergeant Michael Edward Bitts. Specialist Edward John Anguinio. Sergeant Donald Ralph Waters. Private Brandon Ulysses Sloan. Private First Class Lori Ann Pisqua. Chief Warrant Officer Johnny Villarreal Mata. Specialist James Michael Keel. Private First Class Howard Johnson II. Private Ruin Estrella Soto. Master Sergeant Robert John Dowdy. Sergeant George Edward Buggs. Second Lieutenant Frederick Eben Corcorney Jr. Specialist Jamal Rashard Addison. Captain Christopher Scott Seifert. Sergeant Nicholas Michael Hodson. First Lieutenant Tamara Long Archuleta. Staff Sergeant John Mike Teal. Senior Airman Jason Thomas Pleat. Staff Sergeant Jason Carlisle Hicks. Master Sergeant Michael Maltz. Lieutenant Colonel John Stein. Lance Corporal Thomas Allen Blair. Specialist Gregory Paul Sanders. Sergeant Bradley Stephen Korthaus. Corporal Evan Tyler James. Hospital Corpsman 3rd Michael Van Jr. Major Gregory Lewis Stone. Major Kevin Gerard Knapp. Lance Corporal Jesus Alberto Suarez del Solar. Gunnery Sergeant Jofis Menusa. Corporal Robert Marcus Rodriguez. Private Class Francisco Abraham Martinez Flores. Lance Corporal Patrick Terrence O'Day. Staff Sergeant Donald Charles May Jr. Sergeant Roderick Antone Solomon. Sergeant Fernando Padilla Ramirez. Lance Corporal William Wayne White. Sergeant Eugene Williams. Private First Class Diego Fernando Rincon. Corporal Michael Edward Curtin. Private First Class Michael Russell Creighton Weldon. Staff Sergeant James Wilford Colley. Staff Sergeant Jacob L. Frazier. Sergeant Orlando Morales. Captain Aaron Joseph Contreras. Sergeant Brian Daniel McGinnis. Sergeant Michael Vernon LaLush. Specialist Brandon Jacob Rao. Specialist William Andrew Jeffries. Lance Corporal Joseph Basil Maglione III. Sergeant Jacob Lee Butler. Specialist Matthew George Ball. Chief Warrant Officer Eric Allen Smith. Sergeant Michael Francis Pedersen. Chief Warrant Officer Scott Jamar. Chief Warrant Officer Eric Anders Halverson. Captain James Francis Adamowski. Lieutenant Nathan Dennis Weiss. Master Sergeant George Andrew Fernandez. Private First Class Christian Daniel Gertner. Lance Corporal Brian Edward Anderson. Captain Edward Jason Korn. Staff Sergeant Wilbur Davis. Corporal Eric Hernandez Silva. Corporal Mark Asher Even. Captain Russell Brian Ribito. Specialist Ryan Patrick Long. Staff Sergeant Nino Dugue Levadius. Sergeant Todd James Robbins. Sergeant First Class Rainbow Scott Wren. Sergeant Donald Samuel Oakes Jr.
I'm the mother of Sergeant Eric W. Slobodnik, who was killed on September 28, 2005. Private First Class Chad Eric Bales. Sergeant Dwayne Roy Rios. First Lieutenant Brian Michael McPhillips. Corporal Bernard George Goodin. Sergeant First Class Paul Ray Smith. Private Devin D'Amelio Jones. Specialist Daniel Francis Cunningham Jr. Private First Class Winifred Davy Russell Ballard. Captain Tristan Neil Aitken. Captain Benjamin Wilson Samus. Captain Travis Allen Ford. First Sergeant Edward Smith. Specialist Larry Kenyatta Brown. Staff Sergeant Stephen Alexander Booker. Private Kelly Stephen Pruitt. Private First Class George Paul Huxley Jr. Captain Eric Bruce Doss. Major William Randolph Watkins III. Specialist George Arthur Mitchell Jr. Private First Class Anthony Scott Miller. Second Lieutenant Jeffrey Joseph Kaler. Staff Sergeant Lincoln Daniel Hollinsed. Corporal Yesu Martin Antonio Medellin. Lance Corporal Andrew Julian Aviles. Staff Sergeant Scott Douglas Sather. Staff Sergeant Robert Anthony Stever. Private First Class Jason Michael Meyer. Sergeant First Class John Winston Marshall. Private First Class Juan Guadalupe Garza Jr. Corporal Henry Levon Brown. Staff Sergeant Terry Wayne Hemingway. Gunnery Sergeant Jeffrey Edward Bohr Jr. Staff Sergeant Rion Augusto DeJado. I apologize. Lance Corporal David Edward Owens Jr. Corporal Yesu Angel Gonzalez. Commander Joseph Ace Vito. Specialist Gil Mercado. Private First Class John Eli Brown. Corporal Jason David Milio. Specialist Richard Allen Goward. Corporal Armando Ariel Gonzalez. Private First Class Joseph Patrick Mayick. Specialist Thomas Arthur Foley III. Corporal John Travis Rivero. Specialist Roy Russell Buckley. Lance Corporal Alan Din Lamb. Chief Warrant Officer Robert William Channel Jr. Chief Warrant Officer Andrew Todd Arnold. Sergeant Troy David Jenkins. Specialist Narson Bertel Sullivan. First Lieutenant Osbaldo Orozco. Airman First Class Raymond Lozano. Private Gerard R. Dennis. First Sergeant Joe Yesu Garza. Private First Class Jesse Allen Givens. Sergeant Sean C. Reynolds. Private Jason L. Diebler. Private First Class Marlon T. Rockhold. Chief Warrant Officer Brian K. Van Dusen. Chief Warrant Officer Hans N. Guxeisen. Corporal Richard P. Carl. Lance Corporal Cedric E. Bruns. Lance Corporal Matthew R. Smith. Private First Class Jose F. Gonzalez Rodriguez. Lance Corporal Jacob Henry Kowalik. Lance Corporal Nicholas Brian Kleiboker. Staff Sergeant Patrick Lee Griffin Jr. Sergeant David T. Nutt. Major Sergeant William L. Payne. Sergeant First Class John E. Taylor. Specialist Rashid Sabib. Corporal Douglas Jose Marcin Correz. Lance Corporal Jason William Moore. Sergeant Kirk Allen Straseski. Staff Sergeant Aaron Dean White. First Lieutenant Timothy Lewis Ryan. Captain Andrew David Lamott. Lieutenant Colonel Dominic Rococo Baragono. Specialist Nathaniel A. Caldwell. Private David Evans Jr. Major Matthew E. Schwarm. Private First Class Jeremiah D. Smith. Staff Sergeant Brett J. Patrican. Private Kenneth A. Nally. Sergeant Keeman L. Mitchell. Staff Sergeant Michael B. Quinn. Sergeant Thomas F. Broomhead. Specialist Jose A. Perez III. Staff Sergeant Kenneth R. Bradley. Specialist Zechariah W. Long. Specialist Kyle A. Griffin. Specialist Michael T. Gleason. Sergeant Jonathan M. Lambert. Sergeant Antanzio Haro Marin Jr. Private First Class Brandon F. Oberleitner. Petty Officer Third Class David Sisson. Sergeant Travis L. Burkhart. Petty Officer Third Class Doyle W. Bollinger Jr. Private Jesse M. Halling. Sergeant Michael E. Dooley. Private First Class Gavin L. Neighbor. Specialist John L. Kleinsmith Jr. Staff Sergeant Andrew R. Pocorni. Private First Class Ryan R. Cox. Private Sean D. Ponke. Sergeant Joseph D. Sewell. Sergeant Michael L. Tosto. Private Robert L. Front. Staff Sergeant William T. Latham. Private First Class Michael R. Duell. Specialist Paul T. Nakamura. Sergeant Orthel Javin Smith. Captain Seth R. Michaud. Specialist Cedric Lamont Lennon. Private First Class Kevin C. Mott. Sergeant First Class Vladimir Philip, Corporal Andrew F. Chris, Lance Corporal Gregory E. McDonald, First Class Petty Officer Thomas E. Ritzner, Hospital Men Joshua McIntosh, Specialist Corey A. Hubble, Specialist Richard P. Orengo, Corporal Thomas Sotelo Jr., Sergeant Timothy M. Conway, Specialist Kelvin Feliciano Gutierrez, First Sergeant Christopher D. Coffin, Corporal Travis J. Bradical, Private First Class Edward J. Hergott, Private First Class Corey L. Small.
Master Sergeant James Curtis Coons, Sergeant David Parson, Specialist Jeffrey Wershow, Staff Sergeant Barry Sanford Sr., Sergeant Chad Keith, Private Robert McKinley, Sergeant First Class Craig Bowling, Sergeant First Class Dan Gaberson, Sergeant Melissa Vales, Lance Corporal Jason Tetrault, Sergeant Roger Dale Rowe, Sergeant Christopher Geiger, Specialist Christian Schultz, Specialist Joshua Nesh, Sergeant Jar C. Pulo Coronado, Captain Paul Cassidy, Sergeant Michael Crockett, Lance Corporal Corey Ryan Gurin, Specialist Raymond Reyes Torres, Sergeant Mason Douglas Whetstone, Petty Officer 3rd Class David Marino, Specialist Joel L. Bartoldi, Second Lieutenant Jonathan D. Roser, Master Sergeant David A. Scott, Sergeant First Class Christopher Willoughby, Sergeant Justin W. Garvey, Sergeant Jason D. Jordan, Corporal Mark Anthony Bibby, Specialist John P. Fredig, Lance Corporal Jeffrey L. Clark, Captain Joshua T. Byers, Sergeant Bet Christian, Private First Class Raheen Tyson Hyder, Sergeant Juan M. Serrano, Staff Sergeant Hector R. Perez, Corporal Evan Asa Ashcraft, Private First Class Jonathan M. Cheatham, Specialist Wilfredo Perez Jr., Sergeant Daniel Methvin, Specialist Jonathan Barnes, Sergeant Heath A. McMillan, Sergeant Nathaniel Hart Jr., Specialist William Mayer III, Specialist William L. Evans, Captain Leaf Knott, Specialist James Lambert III, Private Michael J. Deutsch, Specialist Justin W. Herbert, Specialist Fargo K. Letfuga, Sergeant David L. Lloyd, Staff Sergeant Brian R. Hellerman, Sergeant Leonard D. Simmons, Specialist Zerfino E. Kulunga, Private Kyle Gilbert, Private First Class Dwayne E. Longstreth, Private First Class Brandon Ramsey, Private Matthew D. Bush, Specialist Levi B. Kinchin, Sergeant Floyd G. Knighton Jr., Staff Sergeant David C. Perry, Private First Class Daniel R. Parker, Private First Class Timmy R. Brown Jr., Staff Sergeant Richard S. Eaton Jr., Sergeant Taft V. Williams, Sergeant Stephen W. White, Private First Class David M. Kirchhoff, Specialist Craig S. Ivory, Sergeant Eric R. Hull, Staff Sergeant Bobby C. Franklin, Sergeant Kenneth W. Harris Jr., Petty Officer First Class David M. Tapper, Lieutenant Kylan A. Jones Huffman, Private First Class Michael S. Adams, Specialist Stephen M. Scott, Private First Class Vaughn J. Mack, Private First Class Pablo Manzano, Specialist Ronald D. Allen Jr., Specialist Darrell T. Dent, Lieutenant Colonel Anthony L. Sherman, Sergeant Gregory A. Bellinger, Specialist Raphael L. Neve, Staff Sergeant Mark A. Lawton, Sergeant First Class Michael A. Lane, Sergeant Sean K. Cadella, Private First Class Adam L. Thomas, Specialist Chad C. Fuller, Sergeant Charles Todd Codwell, Staff Sergeant Joseph Camara, Staff Sergeant Cameron B. Sarno, Private First Class Christopher A. Sison, Tech Sergeant Bruce E. Brown, Sergeant Jared B. Thompson, Specialist Ryan G. Carlock, Staff Sergeant Joseph E. Robsky Jr., Sergeant Henry Ibarra III, Master Sergeant Kevin M. Moorhead, Sergeant First Class William M. Bennett, Sergeant Trevor A. Blumberg, Specialist Alyssa K. Peterson, Staff Sergeant Kevin C. Kimberly, Sergeant Foster Pinkston, Specialist Richard Arega, Sergeant Anthony O. Thompson, Captain Brian R. Foggs, Specialist James C. Wright, Staff Sergeant Frederick L. Miller Jr., Specialist Lunsford B. Brown II, Sergeant David Travis Friedrich, Specialist Paul J. Storino, Specialist Michael Andrade, Sergeant First Class Robert Rooney, Specialist Kyle G. Thomas, Captain Robert L. Lucero, Sergeant Darren K. Potter, Sergeant Andrew Baddock, Staff Sergeant Christopher Kutchell, Private First Class Evan W. O'Neill, Private First Class Kristen E. Parker, Specialist Dustin K. McGough, Specialist Tamara J. Ramos, Command Sergeant James D. Blankenbelcher, Private First Class Anara Esparras Gutierrez, Specialist Simon Hunt, Specialist James H. Pride, Second Lieutenant Richard Torres, Lieutenant Colonel Paul Kimbrough, Specialist Spencer Timothy Carroll, Private First Class Carrie D. Scott, and Private Sean A. Silva. Staff Sergeant Christopher W. Swisher, Specialist Joseph C. Norquist, Specialist James E. Powell, Private Benjamin L. Freeman, Specialist Douglas J. Wisemantle, Specialist Donald L. Wheeler, Private First Class Stephen Wyatt, Private First Class Jose Casanova, Corporal Sean R. Grilly, Staff Sergeant Joseph P. Bellavia, Lieutenant Colonel Kim S. Orlando, Specialist Michael L. Williams, First Lieutenant David R. Bernstein, Private First Class John D. Hart, Staff Sergeant Paul J. Johnson, Private First Class Paul J. Bush, Specialist John P. Johnson, Private Jason M. Ward, Captain John R. Teal, Sergeant Michael S. Hancock, Specialist Jose L. Mora, Specialist Artemis D. Brassfield, Seaman Jakia Cherie Cannon, Civilian Contractor Christopher Glenn Miller, Civilian Contractor William Carlson, Private First Class Stephen Acosta, Staff Sergeant Jamie L. Higgins, Lieutenant Colonel Charles H. Buring, Private First Class Rachel K. Bosfield, Private Joseph Guerrero, Private Jonathan I. Falinko, Sergeant Aubrey D. Bell, Specialist Isaac Compoy, Sergeant Michael Paul Barrera, Private Algaron Adams, Staff Sergeant Paul A. Sweeney, Second Lieutenant Todd J. Bryant, and Specialist Maurice J. Johnson, First Lieutenant Joshua C. Hurley, and Chief Warrant Officer Bruce A. Smith, Sergeant Joel Perez, Specialist Brian Penston, Specialist Stephen Daniel Conover, Master Sergeant James Curtis Coons, Sergeant David B. Parson, Specialist Jeffrey M. Wershow, Staff Sergeant Barry Sanford Sr., Sergeant Chad L. Keith, Private Robert L. McKinley, Sergeant First Class Craig Bowling, Sergeant First Class Dan H. Gabrielson, Sergeant Melissa Vales, Lance Corporal Jason Tetralt, Sergeant Roger Dale Rowe, Sergeant Christopher Geiger, Specialist Christian R. Schultz, Specialist Joshua M. Noosh, Sergeant Jor C. Puello Coronado, Captain Paul Cassidy, Sergeant Michael T. Crockett, Specialist Ramon Reyes Torres, Sergeant Mason Douglas Whetstone, Petty Officer 3rd Class David Marino, Specialist Joel L. Bertoldi, Second Lieutenant Jonathan Rosier, Master Sergeant David Scott, Sergeant First Class Christopher Willoughby, Sergeant Justin Garvey, Sergeant Jason D. Jordan, Corporal Mark Anthony Bibby, Specialist John Fedig, Lance Corporal Jeffrey Clark, Captain Joshua T. Byers, Sergeant Brett T. Christian, Private First Class Raheen Tyson Hyder, Sergeant Juan Serrano, Staff Sergeant Hector R. Perez, Corporal Evan Asa Ashcroft, Private First Class Jonathan Cheatham, Specialist Wilfredo Perez Jr., Sergeant Daniel Methvin, Specialist Jonathan Barnes, Sergeant Heath A. McMillan, Sergeant Nathaniel Hart Jr., and Specialist William Mayer III.